Kethvarn remembered the day the humans arrived. He was standing in the Great Hall of the Valari Council, surrounded by diplomats from 12 different species, when the message came through. A new civilization had discovered faster-than-light travel. They called themselves humanity, and they came from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. That was 30 years ago. Kethvarn was young then, eager to prove himself as a diplomat. Now his scales had faded to gray, and his eyes had grown tired from watching the slow dance of galactic politics. But he never forgot that first meeting. The humans arrived in a ship that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. It was small, barely large enough to hold 50 crew members, and its hull was covered in patches and repairs. The Valari warships that escorted it to the station were each 100 times its size. The other diplomats laughed quietly among themselves. Another primitive species, they said. Another civilization that would need protection and guidance. Commander Jack Sullivan was the first human to step onto the council station. He was average in height, with brown hair turning gray at the temples and calm blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore a simple uniform, nothing like the elaborate robes of the Valari or the ceremonial armor of the Krethian warriors. When he spoke, his voice was soft and respectful. On behalf of Earth and all her people, I thank you for welcoming us to the galactic community, he said. We have much to learn from you. The High Chancellor of the Valari Dominion looked down at the human from his elevated seat. His 4 eyes blinked slowly, and his long fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne. You are young, human. Your species has existed for barely a moment in cosmic terms. But we are generous. We will teach you, guide you, and protect you from the dangers of the universe. Jack Sullivan bowed his head. We are grateful. And that was how it began. Humanity was given a seat at the assembly, but they could not vote. They were allowed to trade, but only through approved merchants who took most of the profit. They were permitted to travel, but only to certain systems and always under supervision. The humans accepted every condition without complaint. Kethvarn was assigned to work with the human delegation as a cultural liaison. It was considered a minor position, the kind of job given to diplomats who had not yet proven themselves. But Kethvarn did not mind. He found humans fascinating in a strange way. He spent most of his time with a woman named Lisa Hartwell. She was young by human standards, with dark hair and sharp green eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something far away. Her job was to help the human delegation understand galactic customs and laws. In return, she taught Kethvarn about Earth. Tell me about your history, he asked her one evening. As they sat in the observation deck, watching ships drift past the station, Lisa smiled, but there was something sad in it. How much time do you have? She told him about human wars. Thousands of them, stretching back to the beginning of their recorded history. Wars over land, over resources, over ideas, over religion. She told him about weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. She told him about soldiers who marched into certain death because they believed in something greater than themselves. Kethvarn listened with growing unease. Your species fights itself constantly. How have you survived? Lisa looked out at the stars. We're stubborn. No matter how many times we knock ourselves down, we get back up. It's the one thing we're really good at. He found her stories disturbing, but also strangely sad. Humans were clearly a troubled species, violent and emotional, unable to control their worst impulses. But they were also small and fragile. Their lives lasted less than a century. Their bodies broke easily. They needed to breathe a specific mixture of gases and could only survive in a narrow range of temperatures. How could such creatures ever be a threat to anyone? The other species in the council felt the same way. The Krethians, massive reptilian warriors who stood 3 meters tall, considered humans amusing pets. The Valari saw them as children who needed guidance. The Syndicate, a collective of merchant species, viewed them as a new market to exploit. Nobody took humanity seriously, and the humans never gave them a reason to. Jack Sullivan attended every council meeting, always polite, always quiet. He asked thoughtful questions and took careful notes. When the larger powers made decisions that affected human colonies, he accepted them without argument. When human merchants were cheated by syndicate traders, he filed complaints through proper channels and waited patiently for responses that never came. Some of the other diplomats mocked him behind his back. They called humans the smiling servants because they never seemed to get angry. Kethvorn heard the jokes and felt a twinge of guilt. Lisa had become his friend, and he did not like hearing her people insulted, but he said nothing. After all, the jokes were harmless, and humans were just a minor species. They would never amount to much. Years passed. Human colonies spread slowly to nearby star systems, always staying within their designated zones. Human scientists visited Valari universities, studying everything they could get access to. Human engineers examined alien technology with curious eyes, asking endless questions about how things worked. Human soldiers trained alongside Krethian warriors, learning their techniques and tactics. Everyone assumed humans were simply trying to catch up. They were thousands of years behind the other species, after all. Of course they needed to learn. Kethvorn watched Lisa rise through the ranks of the human diplomatic corps. She grew older, her hair gaining streaks of silver, but her eyes remained sharp. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, he caught her staring at the galactic maps with an expression he could not read. "What are you thinking about?" he asked her once. She turned to him and smiled. "The future. What about it?" "Nothing. Just wondering what it holds." He thought nothing of it at the time. Humans were always thinking about the future. It was one of their peculiar traits, this obsession with what might happen next. But looking back, Kethvorn realized he should have paid more attention. He should have seen what was hiding behind those thoughtful eyes. But he didn't. None of them did. The humans smiled and learned and waited. And the galaxy, in its arrogance, never stopped to wonder what they were waiting for. The warning came at midnight Galactic Standard Time. A wave of ships had emerged from the dark space beyond the Orion Arm. They moved in perfect formation, millions of vessels spreading across the sky like a swarm of insects. The Threnkai had come. Kethvorn was in his quarters when the alarms began. He rushed to the command center of the council station and found chaos. Diplomats shouted at each other in a dozen different languages. Military officers demanded orders that nobody could give. On the main display screen, red dots spread across the map like a disease. The Threnkai were a hive species from the galaxy's edge. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply consumed. Every world they touched was stripped of resources and life, feeding their endless expansion. The Council had fought them before, pushing them back into the darkness centuries ago. But now they had returned, stronger than ever. The first world to fall was a Valari mining colony, then a Krethian outpost, then 3 more systems in rapid succession. The Council scrambled to respond, but their fleet was scattered across 1,000 light years, and political arguments slowed every decision. And then the Threnkai reached Kepler's gate. It was a human colony, one of the largest outside Earth's solar system. 4 million people lived there, building farms and factories on a world of blue oceans and green forests. They had no military vessels, only a small defense force with outdated weapons. They were protected, in theory, by the Council's guarantee of mutual defense. Lieutenant Commander Sam Vance was stationed at a nearby outpost when the distress call came. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a jaw that always seemed to be clenched tight. His wife, Megan, lived on Kepler's gate with their 2 children. When he heard the news, Something inside him went very still. He had 3 frigates under his command. Old ships, barely fit for patrol duty. Against a TrembleHFY swarm, they would last minutes at most. But he ordered his crews to prepare for departure anyway. "Sir," his second officer said, "Command hasn't authorized any action. We're supposed to wait for the relief fleet." Sam looked at her. "How long until the relief fleet arrives?" She checked her display. 72 hours minimum. "And how long until the TrembleHFY reached the colony?" She was quiet for a moment. 6 hours. Sam nodded slowly. "Then we're not waiting." They arrived at Kepler's gate to find the sky burning. TrembleHFY carriers hung in orbit, launching wave after wave of smaller craft. The colony's defense platforms had already been destroyed. Fires spread across the surface as the swarm began its harvest. Sam's frigates fought through the chaos, their weapons barely scratching the enemy ships. But they were not there to fight. They were there to save whoever they could. For 4 hours, they ran evacuation shuttles between the surface and their ships. Civilians crowded into cargo holds, packed so tightly they could barely breathe. Children screamed for parents they would never see again. Old men and women wept as they watched their homes burn. Sam sent message after message to the council, begging for help. The responses were always the same. "The fleet is on its way. Hold your position. Help is coming." Help never came. When the frigates could hold no more, Sam gave the order to retreat. 60,000 people. That was all they saved. 60,000 out of 4 million. He stood on the bridge of his ship and watched Kepler's gate die. The TrembleHFY did not simply conquer worlds. They sterilized them. Great beams of energy swept across the surface, turning forests to ash and oceans to steam. Within an hour, the blue and green world had become a ball of gray rock and black glass. Somewhere down there, Megan was holding their children. Sam had spoken to her one last time before the communications went dead. She told him she loved him. She told him to keep fighting. She told him not to blame himself. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply stood there, watching, until there was nothing left to watch. 2 weeks later, HFY was chosen to deliver the Council's formal response to humanity. He traveled to Earth with a heavy heart, carrying documents full of official condolences and promises of future protection. The words felt hollow even as he read them. Admiral Claire Morgan received him in a simple conference room. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut short and a face that gave nothing away. Behind her stood a row of human officers, all of them silent, all of them watching HFY with eyes that made him uncomfortable. He delivered his message. He expressed the Council's deep sorrow for the loss of Kepler's Gate. He explained that the fleet had been delayed by logistical difficulties. He promised that such a tragedy would never happen again. Admiral Morgan listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded once. "Thank you, Ambassador. Please convey our appreciation to the Council for their kind words." That was all. No anger, no accusations, no demands for justice. Just polite acceptance. HFY left Earth feeling troubled. He had expected rage. He had expected grief. Instead, he found something that frightened him more than either. He found calm. He did not learn until much later what happened after he left. Within hours of his departure, the leaders of every human nation gathered in a secret location. They spoke through the night, setting aside ancient rivalries and bitter disagreements. By dawn, they had reached a decision. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more trusting others to protect them. Humanity would protect itself. Lisa Hartwell, now a senior intelligence officer, sent a single encrypted message to HFY's personal terminal. It arrived weeks later, delayed by security filters, and contained only 12 words. "I'm sorry for what comes next. Please remember we were friends." He read the message a dozen times, trying to understand its meaning. But the galaxy moved on, and the mystery faded from his mind. The Threnkai were eventually pushed back by a joint Valari-Krethian fleet. Peace returned. Kepler's Gate became a footnote in history, a minor tragedy among many. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity began to build. 10 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about Kepler's Gate. The Threnkai had been pushed back to the outer darkness, and the Council celebrated its victory with grand ceremonies and self-congratulation. Trade flourished. New colonies were founded. The universe seemed peaceful once again. Humanity remained quiet through it all. Their diplomats attended council meetings, always polite, always agreeable. Their merchants traded goods through approved channels. Their scientists published papers in academic journals. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed wrong, but Kethvorn noticed small changes. He had grown old now, his scales pale and his movements slow. Most of his duties had been passed to younger diplomats, and he spent his days reviewing reports and attending ceremonial functions. It was boring work, but it gave him time to observe. Human merchants had begun purchasing strange materials, rare metals used in advanced weapons manufacturing, exotic compounds required for faster-than-light engine cores. The quantities were small at first, hidden within larger shipments of ordinary goods. But over time, the numbers grew. Human scientists requested access to restricted archives. They wanted to study ancient weapons technology, the kind that had been banned by council treaties centuries ago. Their requests were always rejected, of course. But they kept asking, always with reasonable explanations about academic research and historical studies. Entire human colonies went silent. Communications were rerouted through encrypted relays. Ships that tried to visit these systems were turned away with polite excuses about quarantine procedures or construction accidents. The council investigated a few times, but human officials always provided satisfactory explanations, and the investigations went nowhere. Kethvorn mentioned his concerns to his superiors. They dismissed him as paranoid. Humans were a minor species, they said. They had neither the resources nor the technology to pose any threat. Let them have their secrets. It was probably nothing. Captain Ben Torres did not think it was nothing. He was a reconnaissance officer aboard the Wanderer, a small survey vessel assigned to patrol the outer edges of council space. His job was to map unexplored systems and report anything unusual. It was tedious work, but Ben was good at it. He had a talent for noticing things that others missed. On a routine patrol near the human solar system, his sensors detected an anomaly. A cluster of asteroids in the outer belt was emitting unusual energy signatures. Standard procedure would have been to report the anomaly and wait for instructions. But Ben was curious. He decided to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Hidden among the asteroids was a shipyard. Not a small construction facility like the ones humans were permitted to operate, but a massive industrial complex stretching across dozens of kilometers. Automated factories churned out components. Assembly platforms held half-finished vessels. And floating in neat rows, waiting to be activated, were warships. Ben counted them carefully, his hands trembling as he recorded the data. 647 vessels. Each one was larger than any human ship he had ever seen. Their hulls were covered in weapon systems that he did not recognize. Their engines glowed with a strange blue light that suggested technologies far beyond anything humanity should possess. He gathered as much information as his sensors could capture, then retreated before he was detected. His report went directly to Council Military Command. Nothing happened. The report was reviewed by a committee. The committee concluded that the images were inconclusive and the energy readings could be explained by natural phenomena. Human representatives were questioned and provided documentation, showing that the asteroid belt contained only mining operations. The case was closed. Ben Torres resigned from the service 3 months later. He tried to warn anyone who would listen, but nobody believed him. Humans were harmless, they said. Everyone knew that. Kethvorin obtained a copy of the report through unofficial channels. He studied the images for hours, trying to convince himself that the committee was right. But the shapes in those pictures did not look like mining equipment. They looked like weapons of war. He requested a meeting with Lisa Hartwell. They had not spoken in years, but she agreed to see him at a small cafe on the council station. When she arrived, he barely recognized her. She had aged, of course, but it was more than that. There was something hard in her eyes now, something cold and determined that had not been there before. "You've seen the report," she said, sitting down across from him. He nodded. "What is humanity building?" Lisa looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. She placed it on the table between them. "Coordinates and a date," she said. "When it begins, stay away from these systems. I owe you that much." Kethvorin stared at the chip. "When what begins?" "Lisa, what is happening?" She stood up to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. Her expression was almost sad. "We spent 30 years learning to be small, Keth. We smiled and bowed and accepted every insult. We let you believe we were weak because we hoped we would never need to be strong." Her voice grew quiet. "Kepler's gate changed everything. 4 million people died waiting for help that never came. We learned that day that the universe doesn't care about fairness or justice. It only respects power." She turned to face him fully. "So we built power. We took everything we learned from you, every piece of technology, every military strategy, every scientific breakthrough, and we made it better. We made it ours." Kethvorin felt a chill run down his spine. "How much better?" Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out soon enough. The Threnkai are coming back. Our intelligence detected their fleet movements 6 months ago. They'll hit the core worlds within the year." She walked toward the door. "When that happens, the galaxy will see what humanity really is. And nothing will ever be the same." She left without looking back. Kethvorin sat alone in the empty cafe, staring at the data chip in his hand. Outside the window, ships drifted peacefully through the darkness between the stars. He thought about Lisa's words. He thought about the images in Ben Torres's report. He thought about 30 years of smiles and patience and quiet observation. And for the first time in his life, he felt afraid of humans. The Threnkai returned without warning. One moment, the border systems were quiet. The next, they were burning. This invasion was larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. 10 million vessels poured out of the darkness, their hive ships blocking out the light of entire stars. They struck at the heart of Velari space, destroying 4 core worlds in the first week. Defense fleets were scattered like leaves in a storm. Communications networks collapsed. Panic spread faster than the enemy itself. The council convened an emergency session, but there was nothing they could do. Their military was in ruins. Their allies were too far away to help. For the first time in 6,000 years, the great powers of the Orion Arm faced extinction, and then humanity moved. Admiral Claire Morgan led the first expeditionary fleet out of the Sol system on a cold morning in early spring. 800 warships emerged from the asteroid belt, where they had been hidden for a decade. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The vessels were sleek and angular, their hulls painted in dark gray and marked with the flags of Earth's United Nations. Their weapon systems hummed with power that made nearby sensors go blind. Their engines burned with blue fire that bent space itself. They moved in perfect formation, silent and terrible. The first battle took place at Nexus Prime, a strategic crossroads where 3 major trade routes met. The Threnkai had committed 3,000 vessels to hold it, planning to use it as a staging ground for their push toward the Council homeworlds. They expected no serious resistance. They were wrong. Kefvarn watched the battle from a refugee ship, having fled the Council station when the invasion began. He had taken Lisa's warning seriously and stayed away from the systems on her list. Now he floated in the darkness, watching the impossible unfold on his display screen. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of the HFY formation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Admiral Morgan's voice crackled across all frequencies. "This is the United Earth Defense Force. You have attacked humanity. You have killed our people. We are here to return the favor." The battle lasted 6 hours. Human railguns fired projectiles at speeds that approached the speed of light itself. Each impact tore through HFY armor like paper, creating chain reactions that destroyed multiple ships at once. Human missiles tracked their targets with impossible accuracy, weaving through defensive fire and finding weak points that sensors should not have been able to detect. But it was the fighters that terrified Kefvarn the most. Small, agile craft swarmed out of the human carriers, each one piloted by a single human. They flew with a recklessness that bordered on insanity, pulling turns and maneuvers that should have killed their pilots instantly. The G-forces alone should have crushed them into paste. But they kept flying, kept fighting, kept dying, and taking their enemies with them. Commander Danny Reyes led a boarding party onto one of the HFY carriers. His mission was to capture the command center and disable the ship's weapons. It should have been a surgical strike, quick and quiet. Instead, his team walked into an ambush. 40 HFY warriors waited for them in the main corridor. The creatures were massive, all claws and teeth and chitinous armor. Danny's squad was pinned down, unable to advance or retreat. 3 of his soldiers were already dead. He looked at his remaining troops. They were young, most of them barely out of training. They looked at him with fear in their eyes, waiting for orders. Danny made a decision. He grabbed every explosive charge his team was carrying and strapped them to his chest. Then he walked forward into the enemy fire. Plasma bolts burned through his armor, searing his flesh. He felt bones break and skin melt. But he kept walking. When he reached the center of the HFY formation, he detonated the charges. The explosion killed every enemy in the corridor. It also killed Danny Reyes, but his team survived, and they completed the mission. The carrier went dark, its weapons falling silent. Corporal Katie Shaw was 19 years old. She had joined the military because she wanted to see the stars. Now she was piloting a fighter through a swarm of enemy vessels. Her wingmates dead and her ship falling apart around her. Her target was a hive ship, one of the massive command vessels that coordinated the HFY swarm. Intelligence had identified a weakness in its engine core, a small exhaust port that led directly to the reactor. One well-placed shot could destroy the entire ship. Katie's weapons were damaged. Her targeting systems were offline. The only way to hit that exhaust port was to fly directly into it. She thought about her family back on Earth. Her mother, who had cried when she enlisted. Her little brother, who thought she was a hero. She wondered if they would understand. Then she aimed her fighter at the hive ship and accelerated. Her final transmission was picked up by recorders across the fleet. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. "Tell my mom I love her. Tell my brother to be brave. And tell the HFY that Katie Shaw says hello." The hive ship exploded. 200,000 enemy soldiers died in an instant dot by the time the battle ended. Over 1,000 HFY vessels had been destroyed. The rest fled into the darkness, their formation shattered. Human losses were heavy, but they had won. They had done what the combined might of the Velari Dominion could not. Kefvarn watched the aftermath in stunned silence. Around him, the other refugees were cheering, celebrating their salvation. But he could not join them. He could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. A young human ensign on the refugee ship noticed his expression. "What's wrong, Ambassador?" "We won." Kethvorin looked at her. "What are you people?" The ensign smiled. It was a strange smile, filled with pride and sadness and something else he could not name. "We're the species that crawled out of the mud," she said. "We survived ice ages and plagues and 10,000 wars against ourselves. We don't know how to quit. We don't know how to surrender. When everything tells us to lie down and die, we stand up and fight harder." She looked out at the debris field where the battle had taken place. "You thought we were weak because we were polite. You thought we were harmless because we smiled. But we weren't weak, Ambassador. We were patient. We were waiting to see if the galaxy would give us a reason to believe in peace." Her eyes grew hard. The galaxy failed that test. The war lasted 80 months. When it ended, the Threnkai swarm no longer existed. Humanity did not simply defeat them. Humanity erased them. Every hive world was burned to ash. Every breeding colony was sterilized. Every queen was hunted down and destroyed. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia vanished from existence, leaving nothing behind but empty space and silence. The Council watched in horror. They had wanted the Threnkai stopped, not exterminated. They had expected a negotiated peace, a treaty that would push the swarm back to the outer darkness. Instead, they witnessed something that made their ancient civilizations look weak and merciful by comparison. Human soldiers fought with a fury that defied understanding. They took no prisoners. They showed no mercy. When Threnkai warriors tried to surrender, humans shot them anyway. When hive ships tried to flee, human vessels pursued them across light years and finished the job. It was not war. It was extinction made deliberate. Sam Vance led the final assault on the Threnkai homeworld. He was an admiral now, his hair gone white and his eyes hollow from years of fighting. He had not smiled since Kepler's Gate. He had not slept well since the day. He watched his family die standing on the bridge of his flagship. He gave the order to begin orbital bombardment. His officers looked at each other nervously. The planet below still held billions of Threnkai, including civilians. If such a concept applied to a hive species. "Sir," his second officer said quietly, "there are young down there, larvae. They haven't done anything." Sam stared at the planet on his display. He thought about Megan. He thought about his children. He thought about 4 million people who had also done nothing wrong. "They would have grown up to kill us," he said. Fire. The bombardment lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Threnkai homeworld was a dead rock. Its atmosphere burned away, and its surface turned to glass. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was gone forever, and the galaxy was terrified. The Council convened an emergency session 3 months after the war's end. Representatives from all 12 founding species gathered in the Great Hall, their faces pale and their voices uncertain. They had invited humanity to attend, and humanity had accepted. Admiral Claire Morgan led the human delegation. She walked into the chamber with a calm confidence that made the other diplomats shrink back in their seats. Behind her stood a row of human officers, their uniforms decorated with medals from 100 battles. They did not speak. They did not need to. The High Chancellor of the Valari Dominion rose from his throne. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of deep anxiety that he could not hide. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Admiral Morgan, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must ask you to explain. For 30 years, humanity pretended to be a minor species. You hid your true capabilities. You deceived us all. Why?" Claire Morgan looked up at him. She was old now, her silver hair thin and her face lined with age. But her eyes were sharp as ever, and her voice carried across the vast chamber without effort. because we hoped we would never need them. She stepped forward. When humanity first came to the stars, we came looking for friends. We came looking for wonder. We wanted to believe that the universe was a better place than the one we had left behind. So we accepted your rules. We learned your customs. We swallowed our pride and endured your contempt because we believed that cooperation was better than conflict. Our voice grew harder. Kepler's gate changed everything. 4 million people waited for help that never came. They died believing that the galaxy would protect them, because that was the promise you made. You failed them. You failed us. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every diplomat in turn. So we stopped waiting. We stopped hoping that others would keep us safe. We decided to protect ourselves, and we built the power to do it. The Krethian war chief, a massive reptile covered in ceremonial scars, spoke up. You could have threatened us at any time. You could have demanded equality, respect, power. Why did you wait? Claire shook her head. Because we didn't want to threaten anyone. We didn't want to be conquerors. We built our fleet as a last resort, a weapon we hoped to never use. If the galaxy had simply treated us fairly, if you had kept your promises, none of this would have happened. She paused. You had 30 years to earn our trust. You spent them treating us like pets and laughing at us behind our backs. When the Threnkai came, you left us to die. Now you ask why we hid our strength. Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. We hid it because we were afraid of what we might become if we ever had to use it. And we were right to be afraid. Kethvorn watched from the gallery above. He was very old now, barely able to stand without assistance. But he had insisted on attending this session. He needed to see how it ended. He thought about Lisa Hartwell. She had died during the war, killed when her intelligence ship was caught in a Threnkai ambush. He had received the news from a human officer who had served with her. The officer told him that Lisa had spoken about him often, that she had always hoped they would meet again someday. He never got to say goodbye. After the session ended, Kethvorn made his way slowly down to the floor of the chamber. The human delegation was preparing to leave. He approached Admiral Morgan and asked if he could speak with her. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Ambassador Kethvorn, Lisa mentioned you. She said you were one of the few who treated humans with genuine respect. He bowed his head. She was my friend. I wish I had understood sooner what was happening. Claire nodded. Most people don't. They see what they want to see. They believe what makes them comfortable. Kethvorn gathered his courage. Admiral, I must ask, can there ever be real peace now? After everything that has happened, can humanity ever trust the galaxy again? Claire was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with exhaustion. I don't know. We never wanted to be feared. We wanted to be family. But you taught us that the universe doesn't reward kindness. It rewards strength. So we became strong. She turned to leave, then stopped. The stars don't tremble because humanity went to war, Ambassador. They tremble because now they know we were always capable of this. And they have to wonder what else we might be hiding. She walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty chamber. Kethvorn stood alone, thinking about everything he had witnessed. He thought about the first day he met humanity, when Jack Sullivan stepped off his tiny ship and smiled at a galaxy that looked down on him. He thought about Lisa's warnings that he had ignored. He thought about Kepler's gate and the billions of Threnkai who would never exist because humanity had decided they were a threat. Perhaps the cruelest lesson the galaxy taught humanity was that mercy must be earned with the threat of annihilation. And perhaps the cruelest truth was that humanity learned it perfectly. Outside the window, stars glittered in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled the borders of a new order. The smiling servants had become the silent guardians. and no one knew what they might do next. Kethvarin finally understood why the stars trembled. It was not because of what humanity had done. It was because of what humanity might still become.